Hello and welcome to Katzer's classes. If you have started learning the basics of crochet, whether through my videos or anyone else's, but you are finding it a little bit tricky, which it is, then you have found yourself in the right place. You are exactly who this video is for. So if you have, as I said, learned some of the basics, you know your foundations, you know the basic stitches, but it's just hard and you're having trouble figuring out what you're looking at and where you're supposed to be inserting your hook, or you can't really see what it is you're doing properly, I am here today to give you my top 4 tips of things that I think are so important specifically for when you're learning, when you are getting used to the process, and building up that confidence in what you're doing. And it is worth saying that, of course, everything that I'm going to go over in this video is my personal opinion based on my experiences. It's not hard and fast rules, but it's more options and information I think that people should have just to play around with and help find what works for them. Okay, so first off, the first thing that's going to be a decision to make is exactly what tools and materials you're using. And I find that the specific choice of yarn is actually pretty impactful on the experience of crocheting. So my personal favorite, my go-to for almost every project is a super bulky blanket yarn. I use it for everything and I love it, but it is my firmly rooted opinion that for learning and for first practicing these skills, everyone should be using a weight 4 or like a worsted weight yarn. I have a couple reasons for this. So first of all, worsted just seems like a very nice balance point to me. So working with a super bulky yarn, I know some people gravitate towards that because they think it's, it's bigger and the stitches will be bigger and it'll be easier to tell what you're looking at. I find often it's actually pretty fluffy and harder to see exactly what you're working with, but even more than that, it's really, it can take more effort to work with. It puts a little bit more strain on your wrist and it tends to kind of cling to itself a little bit. And so especially like completely when you are trying to learn how to make magic circles and that moment where you need to pull on your tail to get the circle to close, sometimes blanket yarn just doesn't want to do that. Even if you have done every step entirely correctly, it can just be really difficult to actually pull that loop closed. And so when you're still practicing and you're not super confident that you're actually doing the steps right, that's like your test, right? If it closes, you know you did it right. And sometimes you will have done it right, but the blanket yarn won't want to pull closed and it starts to mess with your confidence and you assume you did something wrong, but you can't figure out what, and it's just because the yarn is difficult. So using a worsted yarn, way less problem in that specific area, at least. So if you did happen to see my first couple introduction videos, I was using this yarn here. So it is that worsted weight, and I selected this one because it's a nice bright color, which also matters. You're looking for something high contrast, I guess, is the most important. So I like colors as opposed to just a white. But something light, the darker you get, again, the harder it might be to see your stitches. Black is notoriously tricky to work with early on. So, something like a lilac, I think is pretty perfect, but, any color will do, whatever you've got. So once you have picked your yarn, all yarn, anything that you get should probably indicate on it somewhere what size hooks or needles they recommend, depending on whether you're crocheting or knitting. And in this case, most of the worsted weight yarn that I work with does recommend a 5. Specifically when you're learning, I don't think it's a bad idea to actually size up 1 or 2 hooks. So in, again, my personal videos, I was using a 6.5 millimeter, and this is almost like a nice balance between, you're still using the smaller yarn, but you still have that idea of making it bigger. Your loops will be a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit easier to see because they're not so tight together. It can backfire a little bit as you're practicing with your tension. If you tend to, run pretty loose anyways, it might be a bit too much, but as I said, I think it's not a bad idea to consider using anything from what is recommended all the way up to 1 to 2 sizes bigger. Okay, so the next thing you want to consider once you've got all of your tools picked out is your actual hand and hook positioning, because there are actually some options. So when I personally crochet, I like to hold my project in this hand, and if that means I need to hold any weird positions, I have this hand to do that. This hand holds the hook, and in my back few fingers I hold my leading yarn. And then I use this index finger to kind of pull and adjust tension. Now from there you can insert your hook, and then I let go of my hook to wrap my yarn. And this is, to me, this is the most comfortable way to crochet. This is how I learned to do it. This is how I do it every day. I would say probably most common way that I see it done is not my way. It is holding your yarn in this hand, which is also where, if you've ever seen like tension rings, it's something you can easily look up. There are tools people use where they wear a ring on this finger to help maintain tension on this yarn. But the idea is it's just the hook in this hand, project and leading strand in your other hand. And I will also add, I am right-handed, and I only crochet right-handed. So if you are looking for left-handed tips, I may not be your person, and I apologize for that. I assume that anything that I'm doing can just be reversed. So it's all just dominant, non-dominant, but yes, these are right-handed techniques. So you hold that, and then you can kind of insert, and the yarn is already right there to hook as you go. And so I personally find it harder to maintain tension this way. I find I have less control, but it's a more fluid motion. If you get really comfortable like this, I'm sure it's a faster motion. And honestly, I'm sure there are people out there who would argue that it's actually better for your tension, or certainly at least if you have one of those tools for maintaining it, it might be better for your tension. But this is a very common way that you will see a lot online. I also believe I have seen kind of a variation of the two where you hold the yarn on the left hand side, but instead of just holding it up, you kind of go through and then wrap around with your left hand. Yeah, I can't say I fully understood that one, but I did come across it, so I thought it was worth mentioning. That there are other possibilities. And so the bottom line of all of this is basically for me to convey that I don't believe there is a correct hand positioning. There's no right way necessarily to do it. Everybody's going to have their opinion about what is going to maintain the best tension or the best ergonomics. You can do your research. There may be options out there that are, easier on certain joints or something like that. But I personally believe that whatever feels comfortable for you is probably the best position for you. So try them out. If you've been doing one of the ways I just showed you and it felt awkward, try a different way. Maybe you'll find you really like it. Maybe it'll completely change the experience you've had so far and everything will start falling into place. I don't know. It's worth a try. And then once you have figured out your hand position, whatever it is you decide you prefer, the next thing you need to do is think about your hook position. So, it is this shape for a reason, and it should be helpful to you. It should do its job better because of this shape, not be causing you trouble. So one of the things that I really commonly see anytime I've tried to teach someone crochet is that they end up having trouble actually using the hook just for this leading strand to get it through the other loops and not getting caught on other loops, like trying to pull through like this and it's not really working. So when I crochet, there's usually a bit of like a twisting kind of motion going with each stitch. So, you got a nice point at the top here. That should help you be able to slide through the stitch you're working on. And then you yarn over, and this is where you need to kind of twist downwards. So if you think about where there's actually space to get through the hole, you don't want to just be pulling backwards as the hook is. The space is down here underneath, so you need to twist downwards to be able to slide the hook through that hole. And then same thing again when you've got these two loops on your hook. The space is going to be down here at the bottom of the loops, right? You can kind of try and like keep them loose enough that you can, but the best way to do it is just to pull upwards enough that there's a little bit of tension, making a little bit of space down here, and then point your hook down towards that space to be able to pull through. And so yeah, hopefully this will be useful to keep in mind. If you are having trouble, try and pay a little bit of extra attention to that positioning. Where is the hook pointing? And you know, the shape should be working for you, not against you. Okay, so with all of that settled and ready to go, the only thing we really have to do now is just getting to the actual crocheting, taking a look at those stitches, and going from there. When I was learning how to crochet, the number one thing that confused me was figuring out exactly what my stitch was. So you can see it, or at least I've been doing this long enough that I can see pretty clearly my pairings of stitches here. And I know what direction to hold my piece to look for them. I can kind of see them from the front. I know exactly what I'm looking at, but I remember being so confused by it. So let's see if my camera will focus nice and close. As I was saying, you're kind of looking for these pairings. They make kind of like a V shape, and you know, that's those are your two stitches that you want to usually go under both to do your next crochet. Now, I was always a little bit thrown off, particularly because I knew basically that's what I was looking for, but if you look on the back, you end up with these sort of pairings of two over here as well, and that's not the stitch you're looking for. That's, you know, a piece of kind of your previous row, but you could theoretically insert your hook like that, and it looks really similar. You've got these two stitches in parallel, and you know, I was always confused if that's where I was supposed to be inserting my hook instead. So this is one of those things that, well, I think comes with practice, because the other thing too is that it's one thing to look at this piece that I've made for this demonstration after years of practice and point out which of the two strands you're looking for, but when you're learning and whatever you've done is probably kind of messy, you know, not quite as uniform as what I've got in my hands right now, it's that much harder to say which ones are which. And honestly, this leads straight into my fourth and final ultimate tip, maybe my most important tip of all. I don't know, I feel strongly about this one, but when you are first learning, you have to keep going. Like, press through is basically what I want to say. I know people, I've known plenty of people honestly, who make a mistake and recognize it as a mistake and go, uh-oh, that was a problem, need to undo it, need to start again, and they're just kind of banging their head against the first couple steps, which in my opinion are the hardest steps. Making those foundations is hard, and looking at your stitches when they're like just one round is hard. And so what I'm talking about here, where the cleaner your stitches get, the easier it is to see what you're working with. You're never going to get that practice and get to the point of having clean stitches if you just keep undoing your work before you get a chance to really practice, you know, the method and the motions of doing single crochet stitches, for example. So I really like to impart on people that mistakes are not the end of the world, and you can crochet wrong and it'll still work. So you're working and you don't really know where to insert your hook. You don't realize, or it's hard to tell or whatever, that this is the stitch you want to be working in. Well, if you do it kind of in the wrong pairing like I was showing before, if you accidentally crochet in these 2 strands. There we go. Well, you're still going to end up with a single crochet to work into on your next round. Or maybe you really can't tell where anything is, so you just pick one of the loops. And in this case, I'd be crocheting into the back loop. But again, you can still make a single crochet in that spot. And even though your pattern itself is going to look a little bit wonky, you're still going to have plenty of spots to work into, again, on that next time around. So if you just keep going wherever you can, just make stitches anywhere and everywhere. You could do it down here, and you would still be able to make a single crochet stitch from that spot. And again, makes your actual pattern a little bit wonkier, but you're getting that practice in making single crochet stitches, and it doesn't really matter if this looks wonky as long as this line is getting cleaner as you practice, because this clean line is what's going to make it that much easier to figure out where your hook goes in the next round and the next round. So yeah, this is my best nugget of advice. Just keep making stitches wherever you need to make stitches. Wherever you can think to make stitches, just keep going and you'll get there. So bottom line here, crocheting is tricky and it takes some dedication and it takes some patience to really learn it, but there are things you can do to help the process. I personally genuinely believe that following these steps will help the process. It's always going to be a little bit about feeling what works for you and just getting familiar with, certain tools, certain materials. But like I was saying, it doesn't need to be perfect. I actually feel like having an imperfect first ever project is kind of cool. It's kind of fun to look back on someday and see all of the little mistakes that you were making that maybe you don't even remember how to make anymore, but it's this like little monument to learning, and you can look back and you can see how much you've improved, and it's all part of the experience. So please, I hope everybody watching this does stick with it and you get to a point where you can really enjoy it. There's so much you can learn from here, but be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. You will get there. Just keep going. And hopefully I will see all of you back here again soon for another of Katzer's classes to, I don't know, maybe we'll make a pattern together or something, but I hope to see you there.